everyone. Today we have another new episode and we will discuss on the topic what is the best moral system. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Mr. Jason, and Madam Ali Rice. I know Jason has a meeting. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Jason.
Thanks, Sharif. Appreciate it. You know, just so I understand, I mean, moral system. How do you define? How are you defining it? I mean, I can give my own perspective if you like, but if you want
Yeah,
to,
definitely. I want your perspective. You can
okay,
define your perspective and everything.
okay, the best moral system. Um, yeah, it's a tough question. I think if you think about the high level beliefs across the world, um, on morality, there's actually overlap. When I think about even like religions, I'm not very religious myself, but there's a high level within each one concept on morality to some degree, um, and it's a little hard to define. I think that essentially, like, you want to do, there's like, people have probably heard of the golden rule before. It's sort of do unto others, um, what you would want done to yourself. But I actually am more fond of the platinum rule, which is sort of like treat others the way they want to be treated, rather than because their preferences would be different than yours. You may like something in particular, but they may not. Um, but I think there is definitely some issues on morality across the globe, and we're seeing a lot of issues around the world, wars and not enough resources, and really our civilization, from a morality standpoint, I think could be doing a lot better. I think that we have massive wealth inequality, where the top 1/10 of 1% holds the majority of wealth, huge amounts of wealth. Um, and at the same time, there's so many issues. There's so many issues in the world. In particular, the aging issue, which people have probably heard me talk about, is centered around morality, actually. And we feel that baby boomers and seniors and people who are slightly older than the rest, that we have a moral obligation to treat them just like everyone else. These people who are in their 90s, they still want to live. And I think that from a morality standpoint, we should be pursuing age reversal as swiftly as possible. And I think we could actually get there much, much faster than anyone could imagine if the whole world was on board and saw from a moral standpoint that this is critical, especially now that we're deciphering what the code is, and how we can actually reverse the aging process and keep people healthier. So I think centered around that theme. But morality is a tough one because everyone's going to have their own perspective. But I think it's always a gray area. Someone may say, I think there's a few lines like, say you're like, okay, don't cheat. Okay, never cheat. But what about cheating death? Or don't steal. Well, what about stealing from a very bad organization or person or in a certain situation? So I think morality, there's always edge cases, and it's hard to define. Eventually, we're going to have to define morality into the computers and the AIs. Really, they're going to actually pick up our beliefs and morals from the information that they're reading. And we're already seeing this with AIs where they're having biases, where they're having the same biases that humans have. And I think integrating morality into them is going to be very, very tricky. But I think that should be where where our attention should be. It should be really on those core two themes. Aging being the biggest killer on the planet, killing hundreds of thousands of people, and then AI, which is going to help us defeat that problem. But then, figuring out how to align their incentives with our moral compass, that's the tricky part. And I think, with those two, that should be where our attention should be, because there's a lot we can do to improve those two situations and get a better outcome. And they're going to have the biggest impact on a global scale that I believe we're going to see. So I can add a little more, Sharif. Is that enough for you? You're on mute, by the way.
You can add more, no problem. This is really interesting and different view. I think it's helpful for our audience to understand different culture.
Definitely. I'll add a little on the culture thing. I think each culture has a different perspective. They have. I mean, it's a different lot of them in different countries even, and I give the American culture as an example, comparing that to like the Chinese culture or other cultures. In the American culture, a lot of the time, the parents and the children, as soon as they turn 18, they're usually out of the home, fairly quickly. And versus in other cultures like Chinese, for example, you have generations sometimes living together, getting along, and I think there is something in, it's hard to say, is that moral? Like, is the way most Americans are doing it, where as soon as you turn 18, you're out. Their parents, they're not coming to live with their children. They're usually in a retirement home. And some people would say that that's immoral. That's a cultural thing that I've seen across the board. And I think that, learning between cultures, I think is critical in figuring out, what are the commonalities between all these cultures that from a moral standpoint, and trying to find that overlap between all of them and then narrowing in on that. So thanks, Sharif.
Thank you, Mr. Jason. Now I request Professor David Smith.
Sharif, I think this has been a great discussion so far, and thank you, Jason. Let me step back just a minute and go and give some of my definitional elements on this too, in that you begin to try to break down what is a moral system. You have to look at things like ethics, all the other elements there, and integrity. And ethics are a set of moral principles that guide a person's behavior. But then you look at the morals. These morals tend to be shaped by social norms, cultural practices, religion, worldviews, what's happening around you. All of those things begin to help set your morals. What your parents do, what your friends do, what your other circle of influence has done. And ethics tend to reflect, though, the beliefs about what is right and what is wrong and what is just, what is unjust, what's good and what's bad in terms of human behavior. So these go hand to hand together. And you begin to say, oh, what is a system of moral values? And a system is a coherent, systematic, reasonable principle of principles, rules, ideals, value, which, as Jackson kind of said, helps form one's overall perspective. Your moral system is how you shape your worldview. And just one thing to kind of keep in mind is not all moral systems are equally good. They're not all equally bad. And they all have different views that are shaped by what is us, makes us human, what we have done around it, and what's there. And, I love that Jackson brought up the golden rule, and the platinum rule is that you begin to see it. And those are some of the places where you see morals put in place and deployed. But even more importantly, what are the moral values that you have and how those begin to play? And what are examples of some other morals besides the one Jackson talked about? You know, we see these kind of universally across the world. I always tell the truth. Don't destroy property. Have courage. Keep your promises. Don't cheat. Uh, try to be dependable. And you see those, and you see how the values are set up, and how you put the pieces together. Uh, Thinking back to when I was in school a few years ago, there were moral values that you were taught. These could include acceptance, charity, cooperation, courage. I mean, there's a whole list. I could go on and on and on for a while. Fairness, generosity, good sportsmanship, hard work, and all those kind of go together. But back in then, we were taught what was it, a 7-step model of how you do moral reason. And these were: state the problem, check the facts, what are the relevant factors, both internally and externally, what are the options you have to look at, can you go ahead and put those in a list, can you test them, can you begin to make choices against those and test those choices? And I think you'll see those expand and be used quite a bit. But what's the best moral system? Unfortunately, there's not a right answer and a wrong answer to that, because it all depends on the culture you're in, your local circumstances, uh, the environment of your ecosystem, the environments of your hereditary system around you. All those will help define what is best moral system. But my personal opinion is, I start with the golden rule, and Jason, thank you for the platinum rule. I think those are one of the best starting points as you have going forward. So Sharif, quick way to get into it from my perspective.
Excellent. Madam Ali Rice,
Oh,
can
you're on mute.
unmute, please?
Sorry. Okay, I was going to mention the golden rule too, but I didn't realize it was called a golden rule. And I go by it all the time. So I treat people the way that I'd want to be treated myself. And also, I was brought up as a Christian, actually. So I have really strong Christian values. But interestingly, I was on a bit of a spiritual quest, because everybody that was Christian that I saw as an adult was very judgmental. And I think that's not really ethical or necessarily Christian. So the first time actually I went to the States, I had a Native American wedding. A lot of my friends are Mormon, or there's a huge scale of people. My husband really has quite an atheist philosophy. No, maybe not. He's quite spiritual. So and during my experience of life, actually, I've had quite a few challenging times as well. And I think the spiritual ones amongst us have kind of been through hell and back and come through the other side, and actually realised that those testing times kind of crack us open, but we find the light through them, really. So I think so it's quite interesting. And I love my mum's analogy of religion, is that we're all going up the same mountain, and we know there's light there, but we take different routes to go there. I spent a lot of time in Malaysia too, because my sister lived there for 7 years as well. And I really embrace other people's beliefs and religions. And when I'm in that country, I respect them as well. So obviously, in Muslim countries, women cover up, and in Western countries, we quite like being on the beach and getting suntans. So, but I think the thing is that you don't realise the diversity and the beauty of the world until you travel. And I was lucky enough, for our honeymoon, we went round the world. And as long as we went round the world in the same direction, we could stop anywhere. And our last stop again was Malaysia, because my youngest nephew was just about to turn 1. And it was one of our favourite countries as well. So, but the place that really stole my heart, to be honest, was the west coast of America. And I worked there for 10 years. And I was running arts and outdoor programs in the middle of the wilderness in a place that was originally Native American. So there were Native American huts. Anyway, there's something about the kind of the connection with nature that I think we all should have. And culturally as well, I think if you look at the artwork in cultures all around the world, essentially everyone's been trying to make sense of the same thing. And I love the fact that in China, the dragons bring good fortune, whereas here in England, the dragons were always kind of bad and evil. And so I think from my experience, I quite like to turn things on their head and see different viewpoints and see the polarity of things. And essentially, so I just think that if we're integrity and we're in a good place, we tend to be good to everything around us. So, and that kind of the morality aspect for me is that you have to think about the consequences of what you do. And that's in the kind of ethical nature of what we do in technology. You know, and one of the people that I really love is David Suzuki, and he was a genetic scientist that got to the stage when what they were doing, the genetic science that he was doing, he disagreed with because he was concerned about what the consequences would be. So he set up the David Suzuki Foundation. So I think for me, and I'm really conscious of what I do. So I buy natural food for my kids. So we don't have fluoride in our toothpaste. We're kind of, so when my children were young, we had biodegradable nappies, and I refused to use any nappies that didn't. So I'm really, I've got really, really strong principles and things that I do. So, you know, but they're not necessarily, you know, some people don't have the choice and some people do. So I think from my point of view, it's just being conscious of what you do and making conscious decisions, whether you run a business or, you know, as an individual. And I think if you're conscious of what you do, the people around you that tend to be too. So yeah, it's that kind of conscious decision that you think about the consequences of what you do, and you come from a good place. So yeah, it's kind of heart-centered, really. So you make heart-centered decisions yeah, that's my first thoughts.
It was well said. Yeah, no, I think you know, you both bring up a lot of good points. And you know, one of the things I was just even thinking about is this, kind of thought about it when you were talking, Ali Rice. And you know, we see, like, I'll give the example of the simple act of, like, killing a spider, right? You know, a lot of people, you know, the mass majority of people probably have killed a spider, or you know, they're scared of it, or maybe accidentally, probably on purpose. But we think about, like, you know, there's a certain morality to it. You know, you're killing a living species. That now, is that species conscious? Well, that's, you know, debatable, but it might be. And you know, and you know, you're killing something that has its own world. Now, when circling back on the AI concept I was talking about before, the AIs are going to learn things from humans, and when they learn that, they'll kind of realize, like, oh, it's fine to kill a species that's not as intelligent as the one who's doing the destruction. And if they pick that up, they may think, you know, killing a few humans here or there is not a problem. So I actually think we should avoid doing that in front of the AIs as much as possible. You know, now they may end up killing some humans regardless, but you know, we're going to want to minimize that from a morality standpoint. You know, I think the main thing is, like, I'll give the example of ants. You know, humans don't go out of their way to kill ants because we think, okay, that would be kind of immoral to target a species just randomly. But at the same time, if you're walking, or if you need to build a road, or if you need to build a building, you don't really, you know, the people don't bat an eye. They just kill the ants. And that's kind of the thinking with AIs. They may end up killing some humans just because their goals, you know, they need to achieve their goals. And so, you know, I keep circling back on this concept because I think the intersection between morality and artificial intelligence is about to become more and more important, even from the consciousness standpoint. You're seeing now where the systems are becoming more and more capable, and really it's just a computer program that's interfacing with language. I'm sure everyone has heard about the Chat GPT. Maybe some people have tried it out. Now it's clearly not at the point where it's as fluid and understands things as clearly as a human, but you can really see that it's getting close, and there's going to be a big morality debate on, does that system, as it's learning, develop some level of consciousness the same way as a child learns. It starts out with a blank slate, and that child or that kid learns over time and builds its awareness and its consciousness. So what are your guys' thoughts? Do you guys think that consciousness from a morality standpoint can be in a machine, or any thoughts, anyone?
Oh God. We should have.
I know it's a hard question.
We need some other forum members that really understand the consciousness of art, because I don't really understand the consciousness side of it, to be honest. I'm not buying it, but maybe they do. Because
No,
it's an extension of a creation of something, isn't it?
right,
That somebody made.
100%.
And essentially, if somebody would carve something and part of that energy goes into that, does that happen in the same way with technology? I don't know.
Kind of. I mean, at the end of the day, there's actually no machine that you could put someone in or an entity and say that thing is conscious or not. I think they will display signs and portray characteristics of being conscious. Eventually, our society may decide they are or they're not. For a while, it'll probably be that they're not, and really, it's just a fancy computer program. But when you start seeing things like Ex Machina, that movie where the AI really can convince you that it has feelings and it has needs, I think it's going to start blurring the line rather quickly over the next decade or two.
Jason, I love that you brought up that movie, because it part of it does that pretty well, but then part of it totally falls apart. Like when she goes rogue at the end without a power source.
Right.
And you understand, gee, that can't work that way. But the fact that one of the Google engineers said that his AI was sentient, and that you look at that and what that means. But the fact that we're looking at a moral system, to me, implies that we're trying to look at it kind of through a process view. And how do we look at it through a process view? And how can we play those areas? Part of being moral is, can we distinguish between right and wrong actions? And that is really hard to do. If I look at the war in Ukraine, there's very different moral views on the war in Ukraine, depending on which country you're in, which system you're in, what your worldviews are, what your religious views are, what your political views are. And so if I apply the basic moral view of it teaches you what's right and wrong, you can see that a situation like the war in Ukraine, through all those different filters, has dozens of different ways to say, what is the moral value of what we're doing there? But what's interesting is if you go back and look backwards, philosophers, theologians, politicians, they've all say they've discovered the best way to evaluate human actions and establish the best moral system. But if we see that it's really hasn't come into being that way, if we could do that, if I take it and look at this as a neuroscientist, is it the electronics? Is it the brain pattern? Or is it a cultural ingrained thing? Is it part of our psychology? and you see things like the trolley problem in psychology being brought and played here. And does that change our moral view? And this one, I tend to like things more black and white. This one is full of grays, and it's going to be hard to paint in that way too. But you have to see what is best for it and how you can implement it. And Sharif, you always ask about how is this across all the different developing nations? Well, it's actually the same in developing nations and developed nations. We all equally have this very diverse, very chaotic view often of what is the moral system, what's the best moral system. And in a chaotic view is actually, I think, Jason, some of the best ways to look at how this question is put there, because it is a chaotic world when we look at morals. It is a chaotic world when we look at ethics and even integrity. We've seen that all over the world today. You go and look in what's happening in Australia now and some of their political domain there. If I go and look between North Korea, South Korea, what's the moral view there? Very different perspectives. You go into China and you look at their moral police, their AI programs and their moral police, they're put in place there to enforce moral views. I think all of those are things that we have to kind of understand. And can you enforce a best moral system? Kind of what they're trying to do in China right now. I think that is one of the questions that is a great one to ask, and I, for one, don't know the answer.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I mean, searching for like a universal moral ideologies, it's definitely hard. I mean, I think the trolley problem one, that's an interesting one that you were mentioning. I mean, for viewers who don't know, essentially like if you have a train going and there's 5 people on one part of the train and that it's going to run over, do you then switch the direction of the train to run over one person instead? And I think it's tricky. And I think with driverless cars, we're gonna run into this issue rather quickly. Say an AI is making a decision. Should it, if it's going towards 5 people, and to avoid those people, it has to kill the driver by rolling off the road into a crater, let's say. Should it do that? And I think everyone's going to have their own perspective. And I think with driverless cars in particular, anyone getting into one is going to want to know that the car is going to make decisions to protect them in particular. I think that's the only way to have that trust. So it's tricky for that, that to be programmed in the machine to some degree to make that decision. Now, is that moral or not? Will probably be debated. But in the end, that's what the user or the client will want for sure, most likely. And I think and I think David brought up a lot of good examples. I mean, even with the pandemic here, there was this huge 2 sides to everything. It seemed like it became very, very political very quickly, and we're still seeing it across the board, especially here in the U.S. Democrats versus Republicans. We've seen this, for years and years, and each side, whether they are pro-mask or are they anti-mask? Are they pro-vaccine or are they anti-vaccine? Are they, do they think the virus was created as a human to target people, or was it not? And really you see this for many issues, actually, particularly in the U.S., where you have division. And now there may be a moral compass that each side, actually there is some overlap, I'm sure, between each side. Each side believes that they are on the moral high ground, most likely. But really, everything needs to be, in the middle to some degree. Everyone needs to come together to kind of see the other side. And it's a tough question. I mean, say, you're one of those people who are like anti-mask people who are like, look, I don't want to wear a mask under any circumstances. Or, then if someone wants you to wear one, do you have a moral obligation to wear one? But then, of course, on the other end, you want to also have your own beliefs, and your own morality. Like, you may think that it's not moral to do that, to give in. And I think really it's I'm sure people have experienced this across the board, in particular with masks. And I think it has to be somewhere in the middle. There's certain scenarios where you would, and in certain scenarios when you wouldn't. I mean, and at least for me, I mean, I saw, like, during the pandemic, people were scared. It was, definitely a tough thing. I remember just walking outside, like, at least 12, 18 feet from people. And sometimes if I wasn't wearing a mask, people would be mad. They would be like, yelling at you, nearly like, hey, put on a mask. And it's like outside, fresh air. So then the question is, like, from a morality standpoint, do you then wear that or do you not? Anyway, just a lot of considerations. I thought the pandemic really brought out a lot of challenges for our civilization. It was interesting.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
I'm gonna hop off. Thanks again, Sharif. Thanks, David. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks you. Bye.
You too. Cheers. Godspeed.
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's just so much can go there. The other thing is there's different views to see this from different political views. If I'm here in the United States and I look at how the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians, the Humanist Party, and others look at morals, there's slight difference between it and how you're doing. And there's also a Unitarist concept. And you see how it plays and how it's reflected in the system of minority representation. And the Unitarian type of approach wants to try to look at, is there an unbiased mechanism that can be used to support the ethics and morals? And can we begin to work those methodologies? Now, one of the other places where morals come into play in a very interesting way is, how do you support the unfortunate in society? How much welfare do you put out? How much do you support people who are not trying to help improve themselves at all? And that's a kind of a moral decision, a moral dilemma. Healthcare has very different approaches around the globe. And people question on the various approaches, are they moral? And how do you make moral decisions in a constrained system? The trolley experiment's one of them, but the other one is, if I have only a couple of doses of medicine that can save someone, who do I choose to save? How do I take that and work it into a moral dilemma? Should software be designed to have morals, to have ethics? With all the artificial intelligence today, we're saying it should. But how can we do that? Whose moral view is it? Since we've already talked about there's hundreds and thousands and millions of moral views. How can you put all of those within an AI system, in a learning system? It's very interesting. How do you, when I'm in a digital system trying to look at morality, and there's words with multiple meanings, In my company's software package for healthcare, it will read unstructured text. And in healthcare, the word provider in the United States has over a dozen very different meanings. So if I'm trying to put a system together around morality using artificial intelligence, and I see a word like provider, and there's many, many other examples besides that, which of the dozen of meanings does it have? Or does it just guess, and then you have bad moral decisions coming out at the other end? So it's a complex one that we're still trying to work through on the digital side. But for millennial, we have on the human side have been trying to define what is moral, what is ethical, what is right, what is wrong, and we still don't have a single answer for that. And this is millions of years. So I think we can best answer, Sharif. The answer is there isn't one, but there are many to the answer to your question. How's that, Sharif? And Ali, I can't wait to hear your answer.
Okay, so my viewpoint actually is I actually think that one of the things that we take for granted when we're meat eaters is where that meat comes from and the ethics of killing things. And it kind of goes back to the war in Ukraine as well, because one of my best friends, interestingly, lives in Moscow, and most Russian people wouldn't want to be at war either. And she also has two boys, one of which would be conscripted if he wasn't in university in the Netherlands. So that's the other thing as well. As a mother, the last thing that I'd want to do is lose my children on a battlefield. So because my overriding reason to be is to protect them and make sure they're safe and happy. So, but I also think, I haven't eaten red meat since I was about 12 or something. And I think people need to be conscious about what happens to those animals and at least honour the fact that something's lost its life to give you food. So I think the thing is that there's a fundamental kind of consciousness and ethical kind of nature to everything that we do. And I also think, to be honest, I think that, like the pesticides that are on foods should be declared, because unless you buy organic, there's all kinds of chemicals on everything you buy, and it is a worry to me. So and the toxicity that's on everything, on furniture, the way that we clean up, we buy organic products to clean everything so that it goes into the water stream, but most people don't. So that, and the thing is that polluting, I think fundamentally everything we do has a consequence. So the thing is that we need to think about the consequence that we do, whether we're in our own lives or whether we're running businesses or kind of technology wise. But, through the forum, I've learned the incredible things that the AI do. So, if people are lonely and they need someone to talk to, and there's some way of having some kind of conscious kind of communication with somebody, if there's no somebody there, then, as or if there's kind of, when they were talking about surgery and how, there's incredible ability for robots to go in and do really delicate kind of intricate surgery and kind of pinpoint the areas without kind of affecting. So I can see where technology is applied in a beautiful way that's probably kind of giving more precision than any human can have. So for me, it really is about kind of the situation and how it applies and the consequences of it. But for me, I think that, fossil fuels could have been, so I think our politicians and our governments make choices because they want to continue to get the supplies that they do from the existing people that create power. And for me, the governments, it's in their interest to have people smoking in this country, to have people, because they pay taxes. It's almost in their interest to be ill because the pharmaceutical industry and that, for me, there's a big kind of circle of, we pollute the atmosphere and lots of people get all kinds of things from the fact that the air is polluted. So essentially anything we put in the air, regardless of where we are in the world, comes back at us at the end of the time. So actually, it's, I actually think that we need to change our viewpoint from the very top and see things differently. But I'm also somebody that lives in a rural area and uses a diesel car to get everywhere, so we're all part and parcel of this. We can't really extricate ourselves that easily from the way things are. So that you're right, that there is no kind of right and wrong thing, apart from my kind of closing word would probably be, when I worked in the States, I used to work running arts and outdoor programs with people from all over the world. And one of my best friends was from Kenya, and she'd never been overseas until she came to work in the States. And when she came to America, she couldn't believe that they had animal rights. And the animal rights, and this is one of the most profoundest thing that's always stuck with me, is that we're lucky enough in the West to have animal rights, because arguably human rights are kind of dealt with. Although there's lots of kind of argument, there's over here, there's food banks, and there are people that are struggling, so that it's not easy for everybody. But she said in Africa there still weren't human rights, and I think that's very telling about where we are in the world and what's happening. And Roger James Hamilton, who's an entrepreneur that runs the Entrepreneurs Institute with me, that he still says, and I think it's true, that we have these huge mountains of food waste in the West. And in other countries, there's some people that just haven't got enough food at all. And a lot of the governments in Africa are corrupt as well. So the money that goes out to them doesn't necessarily get to the people. And there's obviously a population problem as well. So supposedly we're overpopulated, which, there's another argument about kind of conserving or kind of making people live longer because there's a growing population, but that's another story. So I think, but supposedly there's meant to be sufficient food for everyone, but a problem in the kind of distribution of them. And I said, so I just think if we work together and we weren't greedy, so we kind of shared things, and shared philosophy and best practice, and it wasn't an exchange of money, but an exchange of ideas, that we go somewhere to resolving things. And I think that's why this forum is really good, because somewhere along the line we should be able to join the dots and make a difference on a global scale. But it comes from, people that are doing good things because they're doing it because it makes a difference, not because they're earning a huge whack of money. So I think the money needs to come out of the equation. And, our biggest wealth is our health, which definitely was demonstrated through the pandemic. And there's a whole nother backstory to the pandemic for me, but I was exempt from wearing a mask because it gave me panic attacks. And I've got sovereignty of my body, and I chose not to have a vaccine because I don't know what the consequences of what those vaccines are until, like a couple of years down the line. And I also, for my children, there was lots of cases of children who weren't vulnerable to the vaccine, having all kinds of heart conditions. And so that, again, I'm not going to trust a new vaccine to put into my kids when something fundamentally doesn't affect their health in any big way. So that's what, and ultimately it should be someone's decision. It shouldn't be somebody shouldn't have to go to war because they're conscribed, and somebody shouldn't have anything put into their body unless they agree with it. So for me, I'm really conscious of what I do and what happens to my kids. And my biggest thing actually was my son making a choice to have a vaccine, because I was worried what might happen in the future, because I didn't want him to get hurt, So, but he's almost an adult, he's almost 18, and he's going to have to make his own decisions because they're his. And essentially that's what morality is about, I think. It's about making conscious choices for yourself and for those around you, so that you kind of regard, even, when you talk, the consequences of your actions and what you say make a difference. So you need to be in integrity and be proud of what you said, not think, oh my God, why did I say that? Whether it's controversial or not, but that's where I stand. And standing in your power because you believe what you think, because of the experiences you've had, is really important. And that's how you stay in integrity. And I definitely debate it. I'm open to other people's views, and I think everyone's got a choice, and I respect that. Respecting people's choice and viewpoints is really important too. So yeah, that's the end of my, so that's where my morality stands. Just respect and honor, honor of life and honor of death as well. It's sad when anything loses its life. So yeah. Can you hear me?
Can.
Yes, Professor David Smith. Yeah.
Well, I love listening to Ali today, and particularly when she was laughing there, it was great to throw that into the broadcast today. Um, I would like to actually step back to something that Ali said in her the first time, and I'll put my own two there. Is very oftentimes our religious training and upbringing influences our moral views and our moral system. And who knows? Also, if I begin to look at over time, it's clear that some of the moral views have changed over the centuries. Now, if I go back and look at what were the moral views prior to the Roman Empire, during the Roman Empire, during the time of the Greek Enlightenment, during the Dark Ages, does your moral system change during time of war? And we've seen in times of war that moral systems have tended to change and to adapt and draft. So, Sharif, I think this puts the question up on the table. I mean, Dr. Sharif, it puts the question up on the table. Is it a consistent moral system? Or is it a system that changes as you look at what's happening around you and around the world and the environment you're into? Let's just pull it back even in a different domain. Is there a different moral view with children when they're at home versus when they go into like a pre-kindergarten, into elementary school, going when they become teenagers? Well, Ali, I think you can answer this one for me, but if I remember my teenagers, I thought they had a very different moral system when they were teenagers than they did when they were younger, than they did when they were older now. So those are the types of changes, Sharif, I think that's hard to put in place with a question that is like a black and white question. What is the best moral system? And, I don't think there's a black and white answer. And I don't think even with a moral system, there is a black and white answer because of all the factors we've talked about this morning. And, I wish there was a good one. It's kind of like when you look at politics. And I think one of the truism with most politicians is they stretch the truth. I don't think I know of a politician who does not stretch the truth. So does that make that politician moral or immoral because they stretch the truth? Or is it a bias that we all understand that politicians do that? So to me, those are some of the philosophical questions that this raises, Dr. Sharif. And you're asking, at least for me, a philosophical question to a technologist. And I can take you through my decision trees for this, but that doesn't answer the question of what is the best moral system. So that's my thoughts, Sharif.
Thank you. Madam Alidas, what's an interesting aspect you want to share with our audience? I want to welcome.
One of the things that I was going to say actually is because I've got children and I've always worked with children in education. And I obviously I've kind of embraced because I'm going to be 55 in May next year. And over those 55 years, my thoughts of what happens to us and how things, definitely between 0 and 7, the experiences of a child, those patterns they have influenced them all the way through their lives. So that 0 to 7 experience is really, really important. And I was born a twin. So interestingly, when I was born, I wasn't seen as an I, and I didn't feel like an I felt like a we. So I constantly had a companion, and it's really interesting. So instead of an individual, I think we kind of learned to individuate, but we were seen as a unit as well. And from my experience and my children as well, there's something that I read, but I see children as kind of like a seed. And I actually think there's innate inbuilt knowledge in there. So I don't think they're a computer that just gets programmed at all. I actually think that there's something in them that's already there. And I actually think it comes from generations before as well. So I think there's knowledge that's transferred in the DNA as well. So there's kind of almost a mission in it. There's stuff in there that's kind of connected to everyone that's come before them as well. So yeah, so I see them more as like a lotus flower that's going to bloom. And it's the way that they're treated that depends how they bloom and how comfortable they are in the world and how comfortable they are in their own skin. And for me, our children were encouraged to be individuals, and they're quite eccentric, but they've always been really, really happy and contented to be themselves. And I think that's what's interesting is that so far, touch wood, they're not sheep. They're very individual and they make their own choices, but they're true to themselves and their friends, and they kind of follow their heart really. And I think that's kind of imagine if everybody could do that. So I think it would be nice if in this moral world that if we were more heart-centered and we looked at the way that we can come together, that we need to be bridges and cover the gaps. So the division, we kind of iron out the division and try and find solace in each other and commonality, and kind of, as I think if everyone thought the same, it would be boring as well. So, but I just think, that kind of diversity of thought and things that, it makes the world go round, but we just need to work together instead of pulling apart. And that kind of community is really important. I think all the way through pandemics, the isolation, I think that's the other thing, the isolation reminded me of animals in captivity, which is also something that I've had a hard time with as well. But I wouldn't have the love for animals if I hadn't seen animals in the zoo. So yeah, and my brother worked on projects in Malaysia, actually on field projects as well in the wild. So it kind of led him to work in the wild and protect and preserve kind of the habitat that's left. So I think maybe there's a reason for everything. So I think actually I'd written down that most things in the world, whatever they are, like little bugs or, everything has a purpose, and so do we too. So I think we're all part of this incredible interconnected spider web of a world. And if we keep breaking the little parts of web that are there, it'll all fall apart. So I think kind of the natural world and how the systems within it work are just as important as the human systems. And I think technology needs to embrace that too. Because I'd hate it if we ended up with a world where there was no nature and we had these smart cities, and oh my God, it would be horrendous to me. So yeah, so kind of keeping the natural world and being part of the natural environment's incredibly good for us and incredibly good for the world. So yeah, that's my moral compass, I think. Yeah, I haven't ever left nature behind. Oh, Mark.
Hey there, I'm back. Sorry about that. It was a ton of other things going on in the world and all of that, but definitely hearing that conversation around morals and morality is very much interesting and all in that space. Ali, I don't know how you feel, but I've said this a couple of times on different shows, but I personally think that the moral systems are actually quite alike, but we get caught up in the extremes. And that's just kind of my philosophy, because I think that if you look at the religious leaders of the East or the West, or whatever the different religions are, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or even Hindu and Buddhist, and definitely even some of those that would be considered fringe religions like the Yoruba and some of the other things, I think that we all want what is good in life. We want to be connected to our ancestors. We want to definitely have respect for Mother Nature and respect for our family and all in that space. So I think that it is the moral centers that are very much the same, but unfortunately we let the extremes get carried away, and we also get caught up in this my way or the highway attitude. And I don't have any proof of this, and I'm not in a rush to have any proof anytime soon, But I think that when we get to heaven's gates, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be up there getting very surprised by who their fellow mates are up there in heaven, because I'm thinking that they might see some people up there that they were swearing up and down were not going to be there because of their life choices, because of their patterns in life, and because of a number of other things that go on in life. Because I personally think that the God force looks at the entirety of our book and everything from the birth to the death, and there might be a lot of people that will be sitting there going like, wait a minute, Joe from around the corner, he's up here. Could have swore that he cheated on his wife 5 or 6 times and all in that, and or Sally is there. I could have sworn that she was involved in that drug culture for a while. How did she get up here and everything? But they don't know the life story. They don't know the life journey, and they don't know the whole nature of what has happened in life and how they treated everything from their pets to their family to a number of other things in life, and what they did in the life journey and in that life book that we all supposedly have and all of that. But that's just my thoughts. I don't know if Ali agrees with me or even David agrees with me or Dr. Sharif, but I think that that's my attitude, is that we have to realize that every choice we make is a choice that is impacting not just us, but the rest of society as well. And we just try to make the best choices that we can in life and hope that at the end of the day, the God force makes the judgment that we need to go up into heaven's gates and maybe not get sent back for a repeat journey. Because I do think we have to go and learn the lessons by coming back to this earth and all in that. That's where that whole notion of reincarnation comes. Or you definitely don't want to make the journey all the way to the other side, even though some people would say that we're already on the other side, because some people would say that it's hell on earth and all of that. But that's just my attitude. Is a very positive attitude that we need to try to make positive choices. And I always get really good energy when I see the lovely Ali. And of course, David gives me great energy as well, as does Dr. Sharif. So I'm always glad to see these lovely smiles when I come in here and see the conversations that are going on that you bring on a regular basis, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Marty. Mr. David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, my concluding remarks are going to be pretty brief today. And part of it is that as the world enters this new year, let's go ahead and say, what can we be is for our own best moral system? How can we make our own best moral judgments? How can we impact others around us to have integrity, have ethics, and create the best moral views of those around us? And I think if we can do that, the world will be a better place. So thank you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an excellent discussion. Definitely, we learn a new things about moral system. It's different perspective from different part of the world. That is the way actually World Talent Economy Forum growing. We are bringing different people from different part of the world, and most importantly, we from these sessions, many entrepreneurs, youth community, government agency, corporations, and academy, they learn, especially emerging economy, they learn new things, and we are taking actions. We are developing cities, developing smart villages, hospitals, academies, different kind of new technology. So hopefully, through this process, we can minimize the gap in between developed worlds and developing worlds. So your contributions is extremely, extremely important for us. Beside this dialogue, I always inspire our entrepreneurs, our speakers, our thought leaders, take actions and solve different complex problems. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Take care. Bye.
Take it easy.
Bye bye.